I moved a bunch of my, I've been trying to squirrel more and more stuff away up in my room so I don't have to go downstairs as much because people in my house are driving me crazy. And I just don't want to be downstairs if I can avoid it. So I brought sugar up here to add to my tea, along with little pockets of creamer, because they're nice. I'm gonna go ahead and stir that carefully. Okay.
Reported missing.
Eventually, the forensic evidence provided those answers.
Everybody and their brother was trying to make a deal with the devil.
Let he who has no sin cast the first stone. Let me tell you, I'd have no problem casting all the stones.
Okay, lady. Dang.
Life was an adventure for 28-year-old Denise O'Neil. It was no trip she wouldn't take, virtually no activity she wouldn't try.
She always loved to travel. Always either swimming or having a game of tennis or scuba diving, going to museums and the arts, of course. Anything in the arts she loved. She just loved life. She really loved life.
After graduating from college, Denise took a job as a waitress in Palm Beach, Florida, while she looked for a job teaching English.
She knew the restaurant business from A to Z and certainly made very good money, so why not?
Denise was a punctual employee, but after missing 2 consecutive days of work without calling in, her manager grew alarmed.
Denise had been employed at this restaurant for 2.5 years and had never missed a day of work at all.
Her employer notified the police department, and they began a missing persons investigation.
And everybody gets to see
Police
in horror
went
how I
to
draw.
Denise's apartment. Her car was missing, but there were no signs of a break-in.
Her apartment was extremely neat, in order. Nothing seemed to be in disarray.
They also checked the phone answering machine, which provided a clue.
There was an early alert from a credit card company saying there was some unusual spending on one of her cards.
Later that afternoon, police found Denise's car in a parking lot across the street from her apartment.
They immediately felt that someone else must have been in the car because Miss O'Neil was a very, very fastidious person, and the car was just the opposite.
A pink jacket belonging to Denise was on the back seat. 2 soda bottles were on the floor.
There was a cigarette butt on the floor of the driver's side of the car, and Miss O'Neil didn't smoke.
I noticed that there was white sand on the right rear floor mat. We had sand on the driver's side and a small amount on the passenger side.
In Florida, sand is quite common, but not this kind of sand.
It wasn't beach sand. It wasn't black mud. It wasn't coarse brown sand. It was unique. It was consistent with limestone.
Police dusted the entire car inside and out for fingerprints.
We found over 20 prints in total. They were all over the car. They were on the inside, they were on the trunk, they were on the outside of the vehicle.
On the day Denise went missing, her credit card revealed she bought a pair of women's sneakers at 2:30 in the afternoon, but failed to show up for work at 5:30.
So somewhere in between that window, something must have happened to her.
This was one of the best pieces of evidence for the police because it gave them a time frame.
No one at Denise's apartment had seen or heard anything suspicious. But then, a chilling call came in to 911.
Do you have an emergency?
Apparently there's a body in the canal right by our house, by the house where I'm at.
What kind of body?
A human body.
The body was very visible to the neighbor. It looked like it had been wrapped up in some large pink sheet.
Dental records confirmed the victim was Denise O'Neil.
The body was bound. Her hands and feet were tied up with several implements, shoestrings, a dog leash, a multicolored dog leash.
We were numb for like days. We knew we had to bury her. And we were walking up Palm Beach Boulevard. It was so hot and we were freezing. We were so cold. And yet it was hot. And you think you're dreaming, you think you're going to wake up, but you're not waking up at all.
The horror, the fear that poor girl went through prior to her death, the total disregard for human life.
It puts a lot of pressure on police to come up with a murderer, because, people feel like, this could happen again to any one of us.
The medical examiner determined that the cause of Denise O'Neill's death was asphyxiation. She'd been strangled to death. They also found evidence of sexual assault.
When the swab from the victim was analyzed in the DNA section, a male profile was developed.
Investigators were puzzled by the 2 electrical cords used to tie the sheet around Denise's body.
These objects I've never seen before. I was very suspicious as to what they even were. I had no idea.
Research identified them as heat rocks.
A heat rock is a pretty simple device. It's a fake rock that gets heated up by electricity, and people use it to warm cold-blooded animals like a pet snake.
Okay, yeah,
Investigators
nice.
also found some unusual black hairs on the bed sheet. Microscopic analysis showed these were dog hairs.
My killer is going to own a black dog. My killer is also going to own a reptile, whether it be a snake or a lizard. My killer is also going to have some type of association with a size 36 belt, because it's a size belt that we found wrapped around Denise's body.
The sand found in Denise's car was similar to the sand in the area near her body. Proof: Denise's car had been used to transport her body. Investigators knew that Denise had been abducted sometime between 2:30 and 5:30 on the day she disappeared. Her neighbor said they didn't see or hear anything suspicious.
I did not know that what happened. It was strange. I had no clue.
Later that same day, someone used Denise's ATM.
So, this was a thing I did because I thought it would be easier. And it kind of was, but not really. I made a... Oh, that's terrible looking, though. A paintbrush that lets me draw the cliff design from Animal Crossing, kinda. See? I just think it's neat. But that's what I used on the cliffs here. I thought it was pretty cool that I made it.
Card to withdraw $700 from her checking account.
The working assumption at this point for the cops was that whoever used that ATM card probably killed Denise O'Neill.
Unfortunately, the surveillance camera at the ATM wasn't functioning properly, so it was impossible to tell who made the withdrawal. Then, investigators noticed something on the local newscasts. This man, one of Denise's neighbors, kept turning up in various news stories about her disappearance.
This behavior really struck police as odd because he wanted to be in front of the camera and he wanted to be interviewed.
In an interview given before Denise's body was found, he made a surprising reference.
She was very quiet, yeah. When I tried saying hi to her, sometimes she just couldn't say nothing. So she always kept to herself.
What was most interesting was that he referred to Denise in the past tense.
She was very quiet, yeah.
His name was Luis Caballero, and he was Denise's next-door neighbor and was unemployed. But when police went to interview Caballero, he wasn't home.
I happened to knock on door 737, which was right across the hall from her apartment of 738. While knocking on the door, I heard a dog bark.
Through a window, investigators saw the dog and its coloring.
Seeing a black chow with my own eyes, the hair on the back of our necks stood up.
Detectives asked another neighbor about Caballero.
The guy said, the only guy I know is the guy, and he pointed up the guy that lives up there. You know, the guy with the chow and the boa constrictor. I said, wow. Wow.
In the search for Denise O'Neill's killer, investigators' prime suspect lived just a few feet away from Denise's apartment. It was her neighbor, Luis Caballero.
When we first walked up on Caballero, he told us. He didn't say it directly, but he told us he really didn't like Denise. He described her as being snooty.
Caballero denied any involvement in Denise's murder and said he had no relationship with her other than to say hello.
Okay, if I can just do circles.
We
then.
discovered that Mr. Caballero was in serious financial trouble. He had a phone bill of $6,000 from phone sex lines that he had been calling, that he was behind in his rent and that he could be evicted at any time.
Detectives obtained a search warrant for Caballero's apartment.
What struck me immediately was the large amount of pornography inside the closet. The type of pornography that was there dealt with a lot of violence. It was real sick stuff.
We did not find Denise O'Neill's fingerprints inside Caballero's apartment.
But they did discover other clues.
I walked into the actual bedroom area, and as I started to turn to the left, I observed what appeared to be and thought was a fish aquarium.
They found impressions at the bottom of the tank, and it looked like they might be where the heat rocks had been.
A pair of heat rocks and the electrical cords were wrapped around Denise's body. Police also found a pair of black men's sneakers in Caballero's closet.
They didn't have any shoelaces in them.
Miss O'Neill had been bound with black-colored shoelaces.
There was also a reddish-brown stain on the bedroom carpet that might be blood. To be sure, investigators turned out the lights and sprayed the stain with luminol. 3 very distinct blood stains emerged.
It appeared to be consistent with the outline of the buttocks area of a human being.
Also in Caballero's bedroom, investigators found several other important items.
We found a pair of scissors, and trapped within the hinge of the scissors appeared to be blue-colored fibers. We knew that Miss O'Neill had been wearing a blue-colored garment that had been cut.
Oops.
Caballero maintained Denise had never been inside his apartment, but under a cardboard box, investigators found a gym membership card.
And when I picked it up and turned it over, and it had Denise O'Neill's name on it, I was ecstatic. I didn't know her, he says in front of the cameras. Well, I've got you now because she's dead and her card is inside your house.
Detectives believe this clue was left at the scene by a desperate Denise O'Neill.
I can't prove it, but I'll always say that she put that card there. That's the way it hit me.
My first question was, have you ever detailed Denise's vehicle? Luis Caballero's response was, he's never been in her car or never detailed her car.
But analysts found Caballero's prints inside Denise's car. When faced with this evidence, Caballero changed his story. He now claimed he was an unwitting accomplice. He said the real killer was his friend, 19-year-old Isaac Brown.
So, Isaac approaches her and confronts her in the hallway?
Yes, he approached her and grabbed her from behind as she was going into the door.
So now she's into your apartment.
Yes. Isaac has her on the belly, and I'm a little bit hysterical. I never thought it was going to happen.
Brown, who had no criminal record, also confessed, but said the killer was Caballero, who was broke and desperate for money. Brown said Caballero had been planning to rob Denise for months.
There was just loose talk from Caballero saying that, man, I need to come up. I need to hit somebody. I need some money right now. And the only person I could think of that's got some money right now is right there. And he'd always point across the hallway.
Everybody and their brother was trying to make a deal with the devil. In other words, every bad guy in this case was wanting to confess and plead out, but get the best deal they could.
Brown's prints were found on a soda bottle in Denise's car, proof he was involved. Despite Brown and Caballero's conflicting versions of what happened, their stories were identical on one count. They had breakfast together just hours after dumping Denise's body in the canal.
They went to an IHOP restaurant off of Commercial Boulevard in 441 in the city of Tamarack.
Investigators tracked down the receipt for that meal.
When it asked for the waitress to enter how many customers were present, it didn't say 2 customers, it said 3 customers.
This explained why the 36-inch belt used to wrap Denise's body didn't fit Caballero or Brown, and why the shoes without the shoelaces in Caballero's apartment also didn't fit either one as well.
That led me to believe very strongly that I had a third killer, that I had a third individual involved with the murder of Denise O'Neil.
But if there were a third perpetrator, Louis Caballero and Isaac Brown weren't talking. Investigators now had 2 men in custody for the abduction and murder of Denise O'Neil, Louis Caballero and Isaac Brown. Not surprisingly, each man identified the other as the killer. Complicating things further, investigators discovered that a third man was with Caballero and Brown on the morning they disposed of the body.
It is absolutely shocking. The defense now can say the real culprit is out there. The real culprit is the person who you haven't charged.
Oh, there we go.
But who was this third man? When police did a background check on Louis Caballero, they learned he'd been arrested a month earlier for car theft, and he had an accomplice.
He was with an acquaintance of his, Robert Messer.
20-year-old Robert Messer's fingerprints were on file.
Voila, lo and behold, there was Mr. Messer's print on some of the items in the trunk of Denise O'Neil's car.
When police arrested Messer, he too denied any involvement in the murder.
Robert Messer told me, "I didn't kill her. How dare you tell me that I'm the killer? I'll tell you what happened. I was there."
Nope.
Messer said he did nothing, but that Caballero and Brown were both involved. Messer said he was in Caballero's living room when Caballero and Brown raped and murdered Denise O'Neil in the bedroom.
I sat there with my fingers in my ears, and the TV was up loud. I could barely hear the TV now, but I heard her screams. I heard her screaming.
All 3 men were charged with first-degree murder. But when DNA results came back, only one of the 3, Louis Caballero, was tied to the sexual assault. Based on the forensic evidence and witness interrogations, investigators believe Caballero planned the attack on an afternoon when Denise was doing her laundry. When no one was around, he grabbed her and forced her into his apartment. And with Isaac Brown's help, gagged and tied her up. He took her ATM card and forced her to divulge her PIN number. Caballero then left to get some money, and on the way back picked up Robert Messer. Isaac Brown stayed behind. At some point, Denise was able to remove her gym membership card and hide it underneath a cardboard box, leaving proof that she had been in Caballero's apartment. When Caballero returned with Messer, he sexually assaulted her. Then used electrical cords from the heat rocks to strangle her to death. The trio wrapped Denise's body in the sheet using the belt, shoelaces, and the electrical cords. They used Denise's car to drive to the canal, where they dumped her body. They tracked sand into the car and left their fingerprints behind. Later, the three went to breakfast.
They were absolute barbarians. They should have been burned alive, all three of them. And I make no bones about it. And they say, let he who has no sin cast the first stone. Let me tell you, I'd have no problem casting all the stones.
Robert Messer was tried and convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 15 years. Isaac Brown was convicted of 5 counts, including second-degree murder.
Chances are this is where I'll die, in prison. I don't want for someone else to have to go through what I'm doing, when all they could do is just make better choices in who they call friends. Make better choices in you know, how they follow their morals.
Luis Caballero was convicted of kidnapping and murder, and he now sits on death row.
I thanked God for forensic science. And thank God for the men and women who donate their time to study it, to bring to justice these monsters. I am very grateful for forensic science.
Denise O'Neil is one of a few victims that I've encountered through my tenure with this agency that have affected me. I still think about Denise. I still think about her family.
Hi, baby boy. Ooh, he stretched. You having a good time? Snoozing on the bed?
Katie's got up and stretched and then immediately lay back down. Sleep.
Instead of finishing high school, Shemaya Smith dropped out and worked as a dancer at the Cahoots Gentlemen's Club in East Hartford, Connecticut.
I
didn't approve of it. I've always talked to her about getting a job. It's a lot safer.
One night, Shemaya didn't return home after work. Concerned, her family called police.
She's a very respected young lady, and all we want is her to come home safe and sound.
In a search for answers, police questioned Shemaya's boyfriend.
The boyfriend reportedly had some drug involvement. He was living with Shemaya Smith at her parents' home when she went missing, and he had seen her the day she went missing.
He told police she left for work around 3 p.m., but said he didn't know who had given her a ride.
The boyfriend's story that your girlfriend is leaving and meeting a stranger, this would lead most people to conclude that maybe the story wasn't true.
Shemaya's family gave police a potential clue. Someone had left a message on Shemaya's cell phone at 11:55 a.m. before Shemaya left for work.
Saved message. Hey, Maya, Kenny is back in town. Give me a call. Let me know if you want to get together. Okay.
Wow.
Bye.
The significance of this message was enormous. It gave the police and investigators another avenue to go down.
No one knew who this person was. I didn't know. I just knew something wasn't right.
The number was traced to a wealthy local businessman, 56-year-old Kenneth Otto.
We found out that Mr. Otto was an upstanding person. He had a family, a wife and kids.
He was a somewhat successful industrial business owner, had no prior criminal record, and liked to hang around strip clubs.
Ken Otto was a regular at the Cahoots Club where Shemaya worked. And he admitted he had given Shemaya a ride to work that afternoon.
He said that he called Shemaya, and when he called her, she requested that he bring her to work. because she didn't have any transportation. So he agreed to bring her to work.
He said that he last saw her going through the front doors of the Cahoots and that he drove off.
Oh.
But police found
I tried to right-click on
another
something
customer
and,
who
crashed.
insisted he had given Shemaiah a ride to Cahoots that afternoon. His name was Harold Brown, another regular customer. He claimed he not only dropped Shemaiah off at the club, he stayed and went inside for a few hours. He also claimed he drove Shemaiah home later that night, but according to her family, she never made it inside. So police now had two men, both insisting they were the last ones to see Shemaiah alive. And Shemaiah's boyfriend was still a suspect. But where was Shemaiah? Two customers of the Cahoots Gentlemen's Club both claimed they drove Shemaiah Smith to work on the day she disappeared. One of those men, Ken Otto, took a particular interest in Shemaiah.
Other dancers at the Cahoots said that Kenneth Otto would spend more time with Shemaiah. He would give her extra attention, sit next to her, buy her drinks, talk with her.
Ken Otto also admitted he'd given Shemaiah $500 to continue her education.
And I told her, nobody's gonna give you $500 just for nothing. You had to do something. And I was like, just promise me you won't never go alone with anybody again like that, because people, you can't trust everybody.
In Ken Otto's version, he claimed Shemaiah walked into the club on the day he gave her a ride. But the club's security tapes disputed that.
We viewed the videos, surveillance tapes from Cahoots, and found that she never entered the establishment on the day that she went missing.
In Harold Brown's version, he not only claimed that Shemaiah went into the club after he dropped her off, he also said he went in too and stayed for several hours. Again, the security tapes didn't show Shemaiah or Harold Brown in the club that day. But the security tapes from the day before explained Brown's confusion.
It was determined that he brought her home the day prior to her going missing.
Brown had simply gotten his dates confused.
It was apparent that he was being truthful.
There was no motive that we could establish why he would commit a crime.
So police focused their attention on Ken Otto, since he'd left a message on Shemaiah's phone several hours before he admitted picking her up. On a hunch, Shemaiah's sister decided to try subterfuge. She called Ken Otto and left a message on his voicemail.
I caused him to pretend to be Shemaiah. If I was like, hey Kenny, it's Maya, just wanted to know if you want to hook up, just call me when you get this message.
And she never received a phone call back. And that was very telling. Because now you ask yourself, why wouldn't he call her back then and ask how she's doing?
When police asked Ken Otto directly if he'd ever had a sexual relationship with Shemaiah, he said that was impossible.
He told us that he was unable to perform sexually due to
Here we go.
some surgery, a condition that he had.
He has erectile dysfunction. It was not very, I'm trying to think of a word, successful.
Investigators checked Shemaiah's cell phone records and discovered that 5 days before her disappearance, she made 2 cell phone calls that bounced off a tower
I had it open for
directly
a
across
reason.
the street from a 75-acre piece of land owned by Ken Otto.
We thought maybe there's a possibility she might be there being held against her will.
We had officers on the ground, and I directed that they go into the property and confirm that there was no one there in need of assistance.
Police asked Ken Otto if they could search the property.
He agreed to consent search of his property on Easter Sunday.
When police arrived, they noticed construction equipment, a trailer, some vehicles, and a fire pit.
There was some heavy burning in the fire pit. There was a smell of fuel.
But something else bothered investigators. Apparently, Otto didn't mind the police looking around, but the cadaver dogs were another story.
He became very upset when the dogs arrived. It appeared to me that he was worried we were going to find something.
There was a wood chipper on the property. There's history of cases in the past where people have used wood chippers to dispose of human bodies.
Terrific.
At this point, convinced he'd cooperated as much as he needed to, Otto asked the police to leave.
You know what? I need you to wrap this up. I didn't know you were coming out here with all these guys and dogs and stuff, so wrap this up. All right. Now. All right.
When someone grants a consent to search their property, they're entitled to revoke that.
But by this time, the cadaver dogs had already picked up a scent in the fire pit.
One of the dogs found a chunk of flesh that it appeared to be animal flesh.
Once again, Ken Otto had an explanation.
You might find a beaver there.
Excuse me?
A beaver. I shot one a while back and burned it in the pit.
Okay.
There was no obvious evidence of a beaver being in the fire pit. Ken Otto explained that he liked to kill animals and chop them up and spread them in the sand.
It was disappointing that Mr. Otto revoked his consent, but we knew we would be back.
I feel like if someone admits to that, you should just be
after
like,
Shemaiah Smith's disappearance,
all right, okay,
investigators
that makes
no
you seem
longer
like the
considered
biggest
her boyfriend
sociopath,
a
but
suspect.
okay.
The boyfriend saw Shemaiah leave the house and walk out, and that was the last time that he saw her. I believe that the boyfriend was telling the truth.
Investigators were more interested in Shemaiah's relationship with Ken Otto, a customer at the Cahoots Gentlemen's Club, and a piece of land he owned in rural Connecticut.
It's about 75 acres large. It's landlocked. That means it's surrounded by other forest. There's one road, which is a dirt road, access to it.
By his own admission, Otto was the last known person to see Shemaiah alive when he picked her up at her home on the day she disappeared. Otto allowed police to conduct an initial search of his property, but asked them to leave when he realized they brought cadaver dogs. In order to perform a more detailed search, detectives needed both a warrant and lots of heavy equipment and manpower.
There were 2 jurisdictions involved in this. There was a substantial rainstorm that came during that week that hampered the efforts, and they all came together, causing an 8-day delay.
Not only could the rainstorm have washed away any evidence, but 8 days gave Otto plenty of time to clean up a possible crime scene.
All of our fears are realized when the police go on the property. Ken Otto is in a full-size tractor attempting to bury the frame of his 30-foot trailer that was demolished and burned.
Wow.
Mr. Otto's property looked like man-made hell. A person that was in the process of destroying everything, trees, digging holes, destroying the dirt road that goes into the property.
But the one thing Otto hadn't yet destroyed was the fire pit.
I was very happy to see that the fire pit hadn't been disrupted all that much.
Almost immediately, detectives got a break. In the embers, they found a house key.
I took the key, cleaned it up, placed it in the door lock of Shemaiah Smith's home, and it unlocked and opened the house. So it was Shemaiah Smith's house key.
But this didn't prove Otto killed her. In the fire pit, police also found a spent bullet and 3 shell casings from a .40 caliber handgun. On the ground, near the burned-out trailer, investigators found a mop, a vacuum cleaner, and a large piece of carpet. Serologists looked for blood, even though it had been sitting in the rain and mud for days.
It's definitely a forensic science nightmare, especially when you're dealing with Mother Nature tampering with the evidence and really just presenting extra challenges.
The carpet was marked with a grid of 4-inch squares, which were then swabbed with phenolphthalein and hydrogen peroxide, a chemical combination which turns pink when it comes in contact with blood.
I started getting areas that were positive with my screening test. And so that got me a little excited, and I was ready to forge ahead on this thing.
Each area that tested positive was marked with a piece of tape.
Okay.
Slowly, an unmistakable pattern began to emerge.
It ended up being an area that was 4 feet by 1 foot in size.
To everyone who saw it, it was a body. It appeared to be a human body.
The outline was in human blood. But when it was tested for DNA, investigators got a setback.
No DNA was present. It was just too much bacterial contamination.
Investigators were beginning to wonder if they would ever solve this case.
I'm looking for the worst, but hoping for the best. And the worst is she's not coming home. So I tried to prepare myself for whichever comes my way, but when you in a situation like this, you really can't prepare yourself.
In the search for Shemaiah Smith, investigators collected dozens of what appeared to be bone chips from the fire pit on Ken Otto's property and sent them to the forensics lab.
This skeleton was burned so significantly that it was nearly destroyed as if it would have been in a commercial cremation. The fragmentation was so severe that you had pieces that were the size of a fingernail. It really is like a needle in a haystack. It's an anthropologist's nightmare.
After close examination, forensic anthropologists concluded the majority of the bones were human. But that didn't mean police were any closer to knowing if the bone chips were Shemaiah's.
There was a lot of thermal destruction. This would suggest a tremendous fire that lasted for as much as days.
I had never worked with samples that had been so charred and so burnt before. So I was very hesitant as to whether I would be able to generate a DNA profile from these remains.
But in a case with so few lucky breaks, the forensic anthropologists finally got one. They found a piece of a foot with soft tissue.
There was still organic material. There was still definitely the potential of getting DNA out of that foot.
Well, the other big challenge was that we didn't have a known sample from Shemaiah Smith. So what we had to do in that case was take those DNA profiles we generated from tissue and burnt skin and bone, and then make a comparison to Shemaiah Smith's biological mother and biological father.
DNA tests revealed that the bone and tissue found in Ken Otto's fire pit was from Shemaiah Smith.
We have enough evidence to establish that the reason he destroyed all that evidence is because he violently caused her death.
2 months after Shemaiah's murder, Ken Otto was arrested at a local airport. He was carrying a briefcase containing $10,000.
He had toiletries, his passport, and various other items.
And he also had a small bag with some condoms in it and some Cialis, which is basically Viagra, generic Viagra.
I have no doubt that he would have bought a ticket and flown to parts unknown.
Taking Mr. Otto into custody was a pretty proud moment in my life.
By his own admission, Ken Otto picked Shemaiah up for work. But the evidence shows that instead of taking her to the Cahoots Gentlemen's Club, he drove 30 miles to his property on the outskirts of town. No one knows what happened after that.
Just sit down for a second. I have to go to work. Sit down, just...
But prosecutors believe that at some point, Otto shot and killed Shemaiah inside the trailer with a .40 caliber handgun. Then he rolled her body in a piece of carpet, creating the blood stains later found by forensic analysis. Then he burned Shamaya's body for days in the fire pit. When cadaver dogs picked up the scent in the fire pit, Otto asked police to leave, and he had 8 days to carry out the most extensive cover-up investigators had ever seen.
Let's see.
But he couldn't destroy everything. Investigators found shell casings, a spent bullet, Shamaya's house key, hundreds of bone fragments, and even part of her foot, which all told the gruesome tale of a needless murder.
I think she was very naive about everyone she knew. Like, she just put her trust in everyone, and you cannot do that.
Ken Otto was tried and convicted of Shamaya's murder and tampering with evidence.
At the end of the day, he's a cold-blooded killer. For that reason, Mr. Otto, you can stand up. On the count of murder, I sentence you to the custody of the Commissioner of Corrections for a period of 60 years.
I was ecstatic when I heard the jury decision that he was guilty for murder. It was a great feeling to, not only to bring the case to an end, but also, again, for the family, to have a good outcome for the family was very important to me.
The whole thing was really frustrating. I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe this man may get away with it, but I was determined. I was gonna fight to the end. We were all gonna fight to the end, so my sister can rest in peace and she can get the justice she deserved.
For virtually everyone involved, the most difficult aspect of the crime was determining Ken Otto's motive.
Mr. Otto exhibited sadistic behavior with his treatment of animals, and he may have been deciding to carry that kind of behavior up to a higher level and harm a human being. I couldn't understand why he would do what he did.
We all have unanswered questions. We couldn't even have a proper funeral for her because there was nothing to have.
It may look like a pile of burned fragments that are completely unrecognizable, but in the hands of a trained forensic anthropologist, they will find something uniquely human, and they will tie him to that victim.
Mr. Otto thought he was going to outsmart
That
us.
looks pretty good.
And he was pretty sure of it. And he was going to do anything he could to try to outsmart us. But,
Yeah.
it didn't work.
Let's do highlights. Streaky's highlights. Are you fucking kidding me?
Music
Whatever.
played an integral part in the lives of Ken Fitzhugh and his wife, Christine.
They met as young people, and I think they shared a love of music. That's kind of what got their relationship going, and they married a couple of years after that.
Ken and Christine lived in Palo Alto, California, where they raised 2 sons. Christine was a music teacher in the local public school. Ken was a real estate consultant. Life was going well for the couple until one day in 2000, when Ken got a call from Christine's school.
Christine had failed to show up for her 1 o'clock music class.
And this was very unusual. She was very punctual. She was very much a perfectionist.
Ken had no idea where she was, so he and 2 co-workers drove to the house to see if she was there. When they arrived, they found Christine's car in the driveway.
Christine.
Inside, they found Christine lying in a pool of blood. One of Ken's co-workers called 911.
Just come to Severe Avenue. What's going on? Somebody has just fallen down the stairs. She fell down the stairs and hit her head. Is she still breathing? I don't think so.
I don't know why I have no sensitivity anymore on these. Help.
When paramedics arrived,
Well,
there was little they could do.
She is dead by the time they have arrived.
At first glance, it looked as if Christine had tripped while carrying the laundry down the stairs.
This staircase had maybe 15 stairs in it, and she was near the bottom, feet extending upward.
Apparently, her head hit a ship's bell that they stored in the basement near the steps.
He said that she was wearing some sort of dangerous black shoes that she had tripped on once before.
But to investigators, something about the placement of the shoes didn't seem right.
I noticed halfway up the staircase there was a right shoe. It was on the left side of the staircase as you're descending. It was going up the stairs. It's not going to fall in this position. That was a little bit odd to me.
During Christine's autopsy, the medical examiner found evidence inconsistent with a fall.
She had 7 lacerations to the back of her head, and those were at multiple angles. What it told us was she had some type of impact to the back of her head, multiple blows.
At that point, we knew there's no way that she got that many wounds falling down the stairs.
And they found more than just head injuries.
She had also been manually strangled. This indicated to us that we had a homicide situation, an assault against this woman.
To hear the coroner describe what happened to Christine Fitzhugh, you would have to think that this murder was committed by some inhuman monster.
News of public school teacher Christine Fitzhugh's death spread quickly throughout the Palo Alto community.
She was a person who clearly touched each and every child she came in contact with, and had a kind of that special magic that brings school to life. And in her case, it was in the area of music.
At first, Christine's death appeared to be an accident.
Ooh, that actually doesn't
But
look
when
too
the
bad.
medical examiner found evidence consistent with a homicide, investigators took over the scene.
I said, I want the crime scene team to go in this house, and I want them to start on it, and I want them on their hands and knees to crawl through this whole place. I want you to find any evidence of what has occurred here.
And there were forensic teams going in and out of the house for days on end. And we kept asking the police, how much longer is this going to go on?
Investigators believe that Christine was murdered sometime between 12:20 p.m. and 1:40 p.m.
We were able to get the receipt, so we knew that at 12:20-ish that she was alive and buying coffee at a local coffee house.
Christine's husband and 2 co-workers found her body and called 911 at 1:40 p.m.
The murder had to have occurred relatively close in proximity to this attempted resuscitation, because if it had occurred several hours earlier, you're going to get a lot of coagulation of that blood.
6 months before Christine's murder, there had been 6 home burglaries in the Fitzhugh's neighborhood.
There was a lot of
that
talk
actually doesn't
that
look
this
bad.
might have been the result of some burglary gone bad, that
I think my
Christine
shapes
might have
were bad,
surprised
but-
a burglar, and this is what happened to her.
All of the robberies had occurred in the daytime, and like Christine's case, there was no forced entry into any of the homes. Those robberies were still unsolved.
The police were in a tough spot. They had to kind of reassure the public that there wasn't a maniacal killer out there.
You got a security system, the people in back of me got a security, they get a little edgy, and now they'll be a little bit more edgy.
But nothing had been stolen from the Fitzhugh's house, and something bothered investigators. They found no blood spatter on the stairs or on the adjacent walls.
Whenever a beating takes place, when blood comes to the surface, subsequent blows start to disperse that blood. And it causes blood to be spattered onto the surrounding surfaces. Those characteristic patterns weren't seen down in the basement.
This meant Christine hadn't been killed in the basement where her body was found. Upstairs in the kitchen, investigators found small drops of blood on the leg and seat of a kitchen chair, indicating Christine might have been attacked while eating her lunch.
That's not bad.
We were comfortable with some blunt force injury with an edged
Yeah, that looks nice.
surface, like the edge of a 2x4. And the obvious object that was right in the center of that crime scene was the table itself. And the table had supports and then a cross member that served as the footing, if you will, of the table. That was something that her head was forcibly struck against that type of an object.
The room was sprayed with luminol, and even seasoned crime scene analysts couldn't believe what they were seeing.
It just lit up like a Christmas tree. It was phenomenal.
It was clear the chair in the kitchen had recently been covered in blood. A nearby kitchen wall also showed evidence of a brutal confrontation. The landing between the kitchen and the basement looked as if Christine had been lying there in a pool of blood.
There were some shoe print patterns in the area of the kitchen door.
And the basement stairs left no doubt that she'd been dragged there after she'd sustained massive injuries.
It was obvious that we were standing where a very brutal event had taken place.
An event that was followed by an extensive cleanup.
To the naked eye, you could see nothing. It was completely clean.
But why would a killer spend all this time cleaning the crime scene?
It was a whodunit. It was a murder in a beautiful place, and we just knew that at that point it was going to be a big story.
No one in Palo Alto, California could imagine who would want to hurt Christine Fitzhugh. She had no known enemies, and on the surface the Fitzhughs appeared to have a storybook marriage. Ken and Christine inherited a large sum of money from Ken's family and rarely had to worry about their finances.
By the time that the Fitzhughs moved to Palo Alto, they had about $2 million in real money.
But investigators learned a troubling fact about their finances. Because of failed business ventures and flagrant overspending, the Fitzhughs were virtually bankrupt.
They had a lot of financial problems. They were not going to be able to make their mortgage, and that was going to be public soon enough.
Their financial house of cards was kind of crumbling down at the time of this homicide.
Christine's closest friends told police the stress of impending bankruptcy was eating away at their marriage.
Christine was thinking of leaving Ken and taking her half of the house and separating from his life completely. We'll sell the house, you'll take half, I'll take half.
But there was something else that bothered investigators.
I'm going up the stairs, there's a large photo. It's of the victim, her husband, Ken Fitzhugh, and their 2 children.
Hey, Lieutenant. What's up? Take a look at this. This boy doesn't look like his brother.
I comment to my supervisor, one of the children don't look like the other, or the parents. That don't look quite right.
And later, during Ken Fitzhugh's police interrogation, investigators noticed Ken referred to his son in an odd way.
Her older son graduates from college in a couple weeks. She wanted to be there for that too. It's really a sad time.
You said her older son. Is he not your son?
No, he's our son.
Further investigation helped explain this slip. Shortly after Ken and Christine were married in 1966, Ken became friends with a co-worker named Bob Brown.
And they both worked at the San Diego Aerospace contractor back in the late 1960s.
Ended up, the 3 of them hanging out together all the time, and Robert Brown was in and around the family all the time.
As a result, Bob Brown's relationship with Christine soon went beyond friendship.
He's having an affair with Christine. As Bob put it, he thought that Christine was starved for affection. All right, so Christine and Bob have this affair that goes on for many years.
When Christine got pregnant and gave birth to her oldest son, Justin, sources told police that Ken was not the boy's biological father. It was Bob Brown.
Robert maintained his friendship. Matter of fact, he was actually Justin's godfather.
To confirm Justin's paternity, investigators tracked down Robert Brown.
We end up finding Robert Brown, and he says, yes, I am the father of her oldest son. We get DNA testing done and confirm that he is the father of the oldest boy.
But as Justin got older and was about to go out on his own, Christine decided it was time to tell him the truth.
Justin was about to graduate, and Christine wanted to invite his biological father to the graduation. And it was going to be sort of at the graduation that she was going to reveal to everybody that this other man was his father, not Mr. Fitzhugh.
Ken claimed he was unaware Justin was not his biological child.
Well, I of course asked him, and he claims that he had no idea about it. And the friends all seem to think he didn't know. Certainly the son didn't know.
I believe Ken knew about the affair, and I believe Ken knew who Justin's biological father was. There is no way that Christine would have gone and told Justin that Robert Brown was his father and think that Ken wouldn't have known. She certainly would have told him that I'm going to tell him.
In the meantime, police didn't tell Ken Fitzhugh that the autopsy findings indicated Christine's death was a homicide. Ken remained under the impression her death would be ruled an accident. During questioning, Ken had difficulty playing the role of bereaved husband.
I must have told her 6 times to get rid of the black shoes, and then she bought some red ones just like them. And she'd get dressed and she'd say, "How do I look?" And I say, "Well, fine, except I wouldn't wear those damn black shoes. You're gonna fall." And there they were on the stairs.
He was doing a bad job of acting because he was overacting.
So then I saw the black shoes. The goddamn black shoes!
Okay.
I think he had been acting for that whole day.
But this was just opinion, not proof of murder. And more important for investigators, Ken had never hurt anyone in his life. Unless police could find forensic evidence to tie Ken Fitzhugh to the crime scene, a jury probably wouldn't believe it either.
Kind of like this round design for the houses.
Ken Fitzhugh denied any involvement in his wife's murder.
The baby girl.
Police found no
I'll get her
evidence
someday.
of his involvement inside the house, but when they got a search warrant for Ken's SUV, that was another story.
We found
I'm
bloody
just
shoes
kinda scrolling,
and a bloody
I'm sorry,
shirt
I don't mean to-
under the...
I'm just kind of scrolling and whatever catches my eye, I'm pulling out to look at closer. Sorry, I'm talking over the... Why am I acting like there's anyone watching this? This is fine. I don't mean to talk over the Netflix stuff. But who cares? It's 3:30 in the fucking morning. Aw, yeah.
The driver's seat of the Suburban.
There was also a paper towel soaked in blood.
That color
Blood
scheme.
that matched Christine's DNA. Ken said there was a simple explanation.
He tells me that this blood came from a gardening accident. He said Christine and him were in the backyard the previous week, and she had hit her hand with a gardening tool.
Christine's body was still in the morgue. Investigators asked pathologists to check her hands.
There was no wounds on her hands.
And even though there was no blood on the soles of Ken's shoes, this luminol pattern made it clear he'd stepped in Christine's blood in the kitchen before it had been cleaned.
The shoe print patterns that are shown in the luminol were in fact consistent with the pattern of the bottom of the shoes that were found in Mr. Fitzhugh's vehicle.
The bloodstains found on Ken's shirt and shoes were medium-velocity blood spatter. This definitely didn't support Ken's story.
The stains are all consistent with being near the source of blood at the time that the beating took place.
Even more damning was the fact that the blood on the sides and tips of Ken's shoes had been diluted, consistent with standing nearby as blood was being cleaned with water.
Dilute blood is often easy to recognize because when it dries, the edge of the stain will be darker than the center of the stain.
And where was Ken
wow, that
between
fucked up right there.
12:20 p.m. to 1:40 p.m., the time of his wife's murder?
Mr. Fitzhugh says that he had left the house around 11:30
Okay, so maybe this
ish and had driven up to Belmont, an area about 40 minutes north of where he lived, to examine a vacant lot.
No one saw Ken at this lot, and Ken's cell phone record showed he wasn't in that area when the school called to tell him his wife was missing.
So it kind of destroyed his alibi of where he was located. He was actually in the Palo Alto area when he received the phone call.
Prosecutors believe Ken's motive was secrecy. He didn't want the divorce or anyone to know he wasn't the biological father of his oldest son.
But this is kind
and
of a
he
cute
didn't
look,
want
too.
anyone to know they were virtually bankrupt.
It was almost like a clock exploded, and all the little springs and levers and wheels of the clock that had been so tightly wound up in that clock just exploded all over the landscape.
2 weeks after Christine's murder, Ken was arrested. Prosecutors said the evidence showed Ken planned his wife's death. The evidence suggests he parked a short distance away from his house and found his wife in the kitchen where she was having lunch. He attacked her in the kitchen. Blood landed on his shirt, his shoes, the kitchen chair, the floor, and the walls. The autopsy also revealed he strangled her. Ken wanted to make Christine's death look like an accident. To stage the scene, he dragged her body down to the basement, leaving blood all over the steps. As he attempted to clean the blood, water splashed on his bloody shoes, diluting the stains, which proved he was there during the cleanup. Then he took Christine's shoes and placed them on the steps to support the fake story that she'd tripped. Ken put his bloody shirt, shoes, and towel in his SUV. He never imagined police would search his vehicle, since Christine's death would be ruled an accident. He picked up 2 co-workers to support his alibi, but he was much later than he expected, since the cleanup took more time than he anticipated. His cell phone record showed he was still in Palo Alto when Christine's school called to say she missed her afternoon class. Everyone agreed Ken did an extraordinary job cleaning the scene, but he couldn't clean everything. Luminol revealed the extent of the cleanup, and the autopsy results left no doubt.
He thought, I'll make it look like an accident. Nobody's going to believe I committed a crime.
1 year after the murder, Ken Fitzhugh was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to a minimum of 15 years in prison. Ken still maintains his innocence, but the forensic evidence left no doubt he was Christine's killer.
You get the luminol and you see that there's this, cleanup, and, you've got somebody lying about where they were. You've got evidence pointing to no one but him.
You never really know what's going on behind closed doors. You never really know what people's lives are like. They have a face, they present a face well, but you scratch below the surface, and sometimes you find these ugly things that are going on.
The heating and air conditioning business was a lucrative one for David Castor. His perfectionism and attention to detail were well suited to the job.
My dad was a very particular guy. He liked everything a certain way. Whenever we worked on something, if something was like a quarter-inch off or wasn't perfectly level, start right from scratch, do it again.
Things were going well for David Castor until his father died. The two had been very close, and David was having a hard time dealing with the loss.
He was very depressed. I really felt for him. I just couldn't imagine what he went through, what was going through his head.
David's wife, Stacy, told friends he began to drink heavily, and his behavior became erratic. When he locked himself in the bedroom and wouldn't come out, Stacy called police.
My husband has locked himself in our bedroom for the last day. Friday night we got into an argument. He was aggressive, but he wasn't violent.
Okay, don't cry. We're gonna check on him, make sure he's okay. Maybe he's depressed. Are you guys going through something right now?
Well, his father died a month ago, and he's been kind of weird acting the last month.
David, are you inside?
A sheriff's deputy arrived at the house, found the master bedroom door locked, and with Stacy's permission, broke the door down.
This is a terrible scene. The guy sprawled naked on the bed. He's face down, but his head is in the corner against the wall. And there's a tremendous amount of vomitus and other biological material on the bed.
Emergency medical personnel pronounced David dead at the scene.
For lack of a better word, I felt kind of raped. Like a relationship was stolen from me. Like it was just taken away.
On the nightstand, next to the bed, were two glasses.
One was half full of a green liquid. Another clear glass which had the remnants of something in it. You can see it on the bottom.
The green liquid was sent to the lab for testing.
We were able to identify ethylene glycol, the main component of antifreeze.
Ethylene glycol is toxic in large quantities. The autopsy confirmed David Castor ingested a lethal dose.
The death certificate came back as a suicide.
Under the bed, emergency personnel found a shotgun and a container of antifreeze.
I think that's a nice...
Investigators wondered if David Castor had a gun, why would he use antifreeze to kill himself?
Maybe he didn't use the shotgun under his bed because he wanted to kill himself over 72 hours and as opposed to, 72 hundredths of a second.
Another item confiscated during the initial search also raised questions.
One of the deputies looked in the trash basket in the kitchen area and found a turkey baster. Well, the turkey baster had some traces of green liquid in it.
I forgot to...
Again, tests showed the green liquid was antifreeze.
I forgot to get the
and
shape.
Scientists found DNA on the tip of the turkey baster.
The only DNA on that turkey baster is at the tip, and it belongs to David Castor. What in the name of heaven is he doing committing suicide by turkey baster? I've never heard of such a thing.
I think I like the design
So
of
investigators
this one
now
better.
wondered
Just the roof thing.
if they were dealing with a murder.
Probably. Oh, that's big.
The official ruling of suicide in David Castor's death was a hard sell for the investigators who were at the scene. They hadn't seen many suicide cases where ethylene glycol was used, and there were several contradictions.
My gut was telling me that there was something more going on with this. It just wasn't right.
For one thing, the victim's wife, Stacy Castor, told 911 operators something that contradicted the autopsy findings.
Friday night, he got heavily intoxicated, slept through the day on Saturday.
Yet the toxicology report showed no alcohol in his system.
That caused us to raise our eyebrows again.
There were two glasses found on David's nightstand. On the rims of both glasses was David's DNA. David's fingerprints were on the glass with the small amount of alcohol residue, but only Stacy's fingerprints were on the glass that held the antifreeze.
If David had been drinking out of that glass and poured the antifreeze himself, he committed suicide by drinking out of that glass. Why didn't it contain at least one fingerprint of his?
And the location of the antifreeze bottle on the floor beside David's bed told a story.
There's vomitus dripping from the bed, and you can see that there's vomitus under the antifreeze jug, but there's no vomitus on the antifreeze jug itself.
Proof, investigators say, that the antifreeze bottle was placed there after David consumed the antifreeze and got sick. And investigators found several things very odd about Stacy.
When I interviewed Stacy, I asked her if she knew what the substance was in antifreeze that can kill you. And she said to me, ethyl glycol. I found it very strange because most people wouldn't know that. But off the top of her head, she knew that when I asked her.
At the same time, Stacy would routinely mispronounce the word antifreeze.
So maybe that's why he had the antifreeze idea. I'm not really sure.
Stacy Castor used the word antifree in the interview. A very odd way of saying antifreeze.
And Stacy also admitted that she knew that antifreeze could be used in a homicide.
She says, oh, by the way, David and I had watched a true crime show where a woman killed her husbands, plural, with antifreeze by putting it in their Jell-O.
This was an interesting comment, since David Castor wasn't Stacy's first husband to die under suspicious circumstances.
Cool.
5 years earlier, Stacy's first husband, Mike Wallace, died unexpectedly at the age of 38.
Nobody did an autopsy. There's Stacy Castor at the hospital saying, no, he had a bad heart, and the physician comes in and just from a visual examination looks at him and says, well, this is a heart attack.
Mike's family had wanted an autopsy, but Stacy said no.
The family were very upset about there not being an autopsy and wanted to know, but legally, it's the next of kin that makes that decision.
A look at Mike Wallace's medical record showed no signs of heart problems before his death. Even more bizarre, Stacy had both husbands, Mike Wallace and David Castor, buried next to one another. In between the two was where Stacy planned to be buried when she died.
This whole thing is kind of like a really bad movie, like that you're in. You're playing a major part and you don't want to be in it.
Investigators petitioned the court for permission to exhume Michael Wallace's body to see if there was any connection between his death and the death of Stacy's second husband, David Castor. A judge approved the order.
The doctor who was going to be conducting the autopsy felt very strongly that if there was some type of poisoning in his system, that it would still be there.
Why? Because the active ingredient in antifreeze, ethylene glycol, in lethal amounts, causes the body to create something it normally doesn't.
Ethylene glycol forms crystals which will affect the kidneys of an individual and eventually leading to death.
Those crystals remain intact for years after death.
Weird.
And the medical examiner found them during Michael Wallace's autopsy.
Like, I know that's
You
supposed to
look
be
at
what
Mike
it
Wallace's
looks
major
like, but I'm not
organs,
sure
you can
I
see
like
the
the
little
perspective all that
speckles of
much.
gold. You can see the little crystals in the organs.
Upon getting the results
I think I
back
like
from the
the
medical
little
examiner's
perspective
office,
of mine
there was
better.
absolutely no doubt in my mind that Stacy had killed both of her husbands.
But just as prosecutors prepared to arrest Stacy Castor for the murder of her two husbands, Stacy made another call to 911.
My daughter, I believe, has taken some pills.
Is she conscious?
Yes, she's normal. I'm leaning over her. Ashley?
Damn,
yeah,
woman, stop
trouble,
poisoning
I
your
think.
family.
Sounds like there's something in her throat. Ashley? Ashley?
Paramedics arrived to find Stacy's daughter, Ashley, close to death. Next to her was a suicide note, along with an empty bottle of sleeping pills and an empty bottle of vodka.
There is a suicide note in which she claims responsibility not only for the death of David Castor, but also for the death of her own father, Michael Wallace.
Mommy, I did this because I love you. I couldn't let Daddy be mean to you and me anymore. Once I put the antifreeze in Daddy's Gatorade, it took only a day or so, and when they dug Daddy up, I knew what was going to happen. They think you did it, but you didn't. It was me.
But investigators were now faced with a dilemma. Was Ashley truly capable of a double homicide?
If Ashley Wallace killed Michael Wallace, she would have only been 12 years old at the time. And could a 12-year-old really formulate such an
I got the
elaborate
names
murder
wrong.
scheme?
No, that's daughters, whatever.
And if Ashley didn't survive, they might never know.
My biggest fear was that Ashley was going to die because her vitals would crash and then they would spike back up. And that's one thing I don't think I would have ever gotten past, was if Ashley died.
Ashley Wallace's younger sister, Bree, found Ashley unconscious one morning and urged her mother to call 911.
The doctor said she was probably 10 minutes from death.
Thanks to Bree's quick action and excellent medical treatment, Ashley survived.
I actually woke up in the hospital and I had no idea what day it was. I had no idea where I was. One of the detectives was asking me questions like, what was in that note that you wrote? I was like, what letter? What pills are you talking about? All I remember was having a drink with my mom. That's all I knew.
Ashley denied writing any suicide note and denied any involvement in killing her father, Mike Wallace, and stepfather, David Castor.
I was always skeptical. I didn't know exactly what happened. I didn't know what to believe, really.
Prosecutors felt that whoever typed the note was also the person that poisoned the two husbands.
To find out who typed the suicide note, investigators confiscated the Castor family's computer and sent it to computer evidence specialist Francis Bracken. The first thing he noticed was that the document was created in Microsoft Word, which has a feature most users don't know about.
If you open a document, type in it, even if you don't save it as a document, the program itself auto-saves it for you in the background, and it gives it an unusual name that you would never recognize.
Interestingly, only one person in the family used Microsoft Word.
Microsoft Word had never been used on the Ashley Wallace account, but it had been used on the Stacy Castor account.
Bracken found evidence. There were numerous drafts of the suicide note, which the writer made a point of not saving. But fragments of the final note still on the computer's hard drive were time-stamped. The timestamps, automatically registered by the computer, showed Ashley could not be the writer.
I was able to determine that Microsoft Word was not used after 2:27 p.m. on 9/12, the very same day, which therefore shows that Ashley Wallace couldn't have written the note because she was in school that entire day.
When I woke up and saw that police officer standing there, I absolutely knew that I didn't do it. And she was the only one there, so it had to have been her.
The final clue was in the note. Stacy let something slip.
The cops said that there was antifree in Daddy's body.
There was always the word antifree in the suicide note.
It hit me like a ton of bricks. My first reaction was, oh my God, antifree. Antifree. What Stacy said in that interview is exactly what was in that note. It wasn't a note, it was a confession. And it was Stacy Castor that confessed in that note.
The more and more we learn about psychopaths, the more and more we learn that there are more of them out there. They just don't rise to the level of a Stacy Castor.
But Stacy Castor denied any involvement in the two deaths and continued to maintain her daughter Ashley killed both men. It would be up to a jury to decide.
You want the honest opinion? I hate her. I hate her.
I mean, she tried to kill you and frame you for murder. That seems pretty fair to me.
As Stacy Castor was about to go on trial for the murder of her husband David Castor and the attempted murder of her daughter Ashley, the question on everyone's mind was motive.
I'll say that she is completely amoral She is completely self-absorbed. Everything in life revolves around her. She's narcissistic to the extreme. She is troubled only by the inconvenience of other people. Mike Wallace becomes an inconvenience, I'll get rid of him. David Castor's an inconvenience, I'll get rid of him. Pick up some cash on the side, you know, parting gifts from Don Pardo as I leave the stage of life. My daughter, I've got to frame her.
Financially, Stacy got a $50,000 insurance payout after her first husband's death. There was even more money after the death of Stacy's second husband.
Our best estimate is that she probably pocketed, with the house, the business, the cars, the life insurance, close to $200,000 for David Castor.
Investigators believe since Stacy got away with her first husband's murder, why not try it again? Prosecutors say Stacy put antifreeze in one of David's drinks sometime on Friday night. By the next day, David was unconscious but still breathing. The evidence shows Stacy tried to get David to drink more, but that didn't work. That's why only Stacy's fingerprints were on that glass. So Stacy used the turkey baster to force more antifreeze into David's mouth. That's how David's DNA was on the tip. Once Stacy realized she was about to be charged with David's murder and the murder of her first husband, Michael, Stacy came up with a plan to pin the murders on her daughter. Stacy created the suicide note on the family computer using phonetic spellings to words she routinely mispronounced, and typed the document around 2:30 in the afternoon when Ashley was in school. Later that night, Stacy mixed sleeping pills and other drugs into Ashley's drink and left her to die.
It was weird, like how tired I actually got from finishing that drink. And so I told her I was gonna go lay down because I was about to pass out. Like, that's how drunk I felt off of one drink.
If Ashley's younger sister hadn't found her unconscious in bed the next day and demanded her mother call 911, Ashley would most likely be dead too.
She killed 2 husbands. Then she tried to kill her own flesh and blood. There are no words that I'm familiar with in the English language that adequately convey that type of person.
On the witness stand, Stacy insisted Ashley was the killer.
You referred to her very negatively, didn't you?
I'm sure I did.
That's right, because she killed, after all, your 2 husbands, didn't she?
Yes, she did. I can't give you a reason why she would do it.
The jury didn't buy it. Stacy Castor was convicted of murder and the attempted murder of her own daughter. She was sentenced to a minimum of 50 years in prison.
You're not just a danger to the general public, you're a danger to the people who love you and are closest to you.
Prosecutors could still charge Stacy for the murder of her first husband, Michael Wallace. But with Stacy serving a 50-year prison term, there doesn't seem to be much need. Ashley Wallace has no contact with her mother.
If I was to go see her, there better be more than just a plexiglass window in between the two of us. I probably would slap her. But I'd be so mad and so angry that I would just scream and yell at the top of my lungs because I don't understand. I don't get it, and I don't think I ever will understand why she did what she did.
Without the forensics, this case would have ended in 2005 with the death of David Castor being ruled a simple suicide as it was. And Stacy Castor would still be walking the streets today.
And everything that she said and everything that she did just backfired on her right in her face. Because you're a killer. Bottom line, look yourself in the mirror. You know what you did. And you know what you tried to do to your daughter.
For sanitation workers collecting trash along the New Jersey Turnpike in 1991, it was a day like any other. Until they found a plastic bag so heavy, the men decided to look inside.
The worker felt like it was a pumpkin or something.
But it was something else.
A body has been discovered.
Human skull.
When police arrived at the scene, they found even more bags with more body parts.
The body was severed into 7 pieces. 2 legs, 2 arms, upper and lower torso, and the head.
There were ligature marks on his wrist, which suggested he was tied up or bound at some point.
One bag contained latex gloves, a bed sheet, shower curtain, and a blood-stained saw.
It tells law enforcement that this happened in some home or a rented place, a hotel room. It could be any of those things.
The victim's wallet was found in one of the bags.
There was clearly no attempt to hide the identity of the victim.
The victim was 56-year-old Thomas Mulcahy, an executive for an information company in Massachusetts who'd been in New York City on a business trip.
He was married for approximately 33 years. He had 4 children, with the youngest being, I believe, 18 years of age, and the others were young adults.
Mulcahy had been stabbed to death, then dismembered. The body parts, as well as the bags themselves, were washed before they were dumped.
Well, the washing tells us that the killer wants to remove evidence, and 2, that there's an intimate aspect to it of keeping the body close. It's erotic. You're taking care of the victim.
Thomas Mulcahy's wife told police some personal information she felt might be pertinent.
She said at some point in his life, he started experimenting with homosexual sex. I don't know that she approved of it.
By tracing his credit card activity, detectives learned that Mulcahy's last transaction was at an ATM at 11:15 p.m., 2 nights before his body was found.
Tom Mulcahy draws $200 from an ATM machine at 49th and Avenue of Americas. With our luck, the camera system was down, so we had no pictures.
There was no evidence Mulcahy had ever returned to his hotel room that night, which was only a block away. But there was evidence he had stopped in a nearby bar.
Mulcahy was seen at the Townhouse Bar, which is an upscale gay bar in Manhattan. He was intoxicated.
This was consistent with the medical examiner's report.
The medical examiner determined that Thomas Mulcahy's blood alcohol level was above the legal limit.
Witnesses said that Mulcahy was talking with a white male with brown hair, but no one could say for sure whether they left the bar together. Using the witnesses' descriptions, police created a composite sketch which was distributed to the media.
We were unsuccessful. Everything we did up until that point was unsuccessful.
But there was one item found with Mulcahy's body that provided an important clue. In one of the trash bags was the wrapper for the latex gloves. The price sticker showed they were purchased from a CVS drugstore in Staten Island, New York.
Wow, that's too...
But investigators still faced a daunting task. There were almost 500,000 people living in Staten Island.
We had nothing. You know, we were grasping at straws.
1 year after finding Thomas Mulcahy's dismembered body, New Jersey police had another case that was eerily similar, this time in Manchester Township, New Jersey.
The body parts were bagged in a similar fashion. They were double bagged, double knotted.
The most striking thing, at least to me, was the way the bodies were dismembered into the same 7 parts. Prints were taken and put into the system, and it turned out that this particular individual had a minor criminal record. He was identified as Anthony Marrero.
Marrero's record showed he was a gay prostitute. Like the Mulcahy case, Marrero's body parts and the bags had both been washed before they were dumped along the side of the road.
We had really no prints, no DNA, anything that could tie us to a viable suspect.
Also, like Mulcahy, the victim had ligature marks on his wrists and ankles.
There's something called a signature killer. That is a killer who tends to repeat their process with several victims.
The cuts that were performed on his body were described as being disarticulated, in that you actually don't just cut right through the bone, you actually pull the joints apart and cut through cartilage as opposed to bone.
This disarticulation was a vital clue.
We know it was post-mortem. The precision of the cuts led us to believe that
Am I spending too much time
this
on
was
this
done by
house?
somebody who had
Probably.
some knowledge. Somebody in the medical profession, possibly somebody along those lines.
One of the bags found with Marrero's body had the words President's Choice on it.
This shopping bag was sold at only 9 locations, and one of the locations happened to be Staten Island.
The store in Staten Island which sold those bags was close to the CVS drugstore that sold the latex gloves found with Thomas Mulcahy's body.
The reasonable assumption is that the killer either lives or works in that neighborhood, because that would be within what's called their zone of familiarity, their comfort zone.
Using a process called superglue fuming, investigators were able to lift 2 partial fingerprints and a partial palm print from the bags. These prints were entered into the nationwide fingerprint database of known criminal offenders.
The results of that entry and the search were negative. There was no match.
We had ran out of leads, and it wasn't looking too promising.
2 months later, investigators' worst fears were realized when another dismembered body was found in a garbage can 12 miles outside of New York City.
I looked down in a garbage can, there it was, a couple arms, folded up neatly.
The reaction of every person who found body parts, and I quote them, was holy sh**.
There was no doubt this was the work of the same killer.
The body was placed in similar type garbage bags, double knotted, double bagged. There were 7 pieces also.
And again, the body and the bags had been washed down.
There was no physical evidence recovered, no fingerprints, no DNA that was foreign to him.
The victim was identified as 56-year-old Mike Sakara.
He was a fixture in the Five Oaks bar in Greenwich Village.
The Five Oaks was a piano bar, and it did cater to the gay clientele.
Lisa Hall was a bartender at the Five Oaks on the night Mike Sakara was murdered. Lisa said a white male came into the bar and sat next to Mike.
Hey, how you doing? Hey, right.
She had never seen the man before.
Yes, got you going.
I assumed he knew Michael, because why would he, when there's empty seats, go sit right next to him? And I made the man a scotch and water, and Michael said, Lisa, this is so-and-so. He's a nurse at St. Vincent's.
When she left the bar, Michael and this man were still there.
Michael was not the type to go home with anyone, and it seemed like he knew him. I didn't think anything of it.
No one saw the 2 men leave the bar together.
The detectives asked me for a name. I said it was like John or Mark, a very common name. But it was just a first name, and I didn't really remember a name. I remembered a face.
So investigators created a composite sketch based on Lisa's description. But even Lisa knew finding him wouldn't be easy.
Well, New York City, it would seem almost impossible to try to find a suspect unless they could find some connection somehow.
Detectives across New York and New Jersey were desperately trying to find a serial killer who was targeting gay men. The media dubbed him the Last Call Killer. The most recent victim, Mike Sakara, was last seen in a bar with a white male whom he introduced to the bartender as a nurse working at St. Vincent's Hospital in New York. When police followed up with the local hospitals, they identified a male nurse at St. Vincent's, 38-year-old Mark Slayton, who not only resembled the composite drawing, he also lived in Staten Island near the stores where the killer purchased the latex gloves and garbage bags used in the murders. Unfortunately, Slayton's prints didn't match the prints found on the plastic bags.
It's heartbreaking. You're out there pounding the payments, doing everything you can, and you don't have an answer for it. So it was very frustrating.
Thinking that the killer may have misled his victims about where he worked, Detective Kuhn enlisted his own children in the investigation to distribute the composite sketch of the killer to all the local hospitals.
It was a family project. I had my kids sitting at the table. What we wanted to do was send a mass flyer out to all the hospitals on Staten Island.
Unfortunately, the flyers didn't generate any significant leads.
There were no motives. Nobody had anybody mad at them. Nobody was going to profit by anybody's death. There were no jealous lovers.
And soon, the case turned cold.
Many, many man-hours, hundreds if not thousands of man-hours devoted to these investigations. And essentially, the trails just went cold.
The murders stopped too, leaving police to suspect the killer may have changed his M.O.
So our thoughts were either he's locked up, he's dead, or he's still out there and he's just getting a lot better at it.
Then, 8 years later, the case went in a new direction. It happened when investigators heard about a new fingerprint technique that was being used in Toronto called vacuum metal deposition, or VMD.
The vacuum metal deposition machine is the ultimate machine to find fingerprints on non-porous materials. You can have material that was stored for 50 years.
Investigators immediately sent a dozen bags from the Last Call Killer case to Toronto. They'd been in storage for years. In the Canadian lab, the bags were exposed to 10 milligrams, about 20 cents worth, of gold, which was heated to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, enough to turn it into a gas. This gold vapor creates a film over the surface being tested, but it is invisible to the naked eye. Then, vaporized zinc is introduced into the chamber. It adheres to gold, which locks any prints in place so they can be photographed.
The end product is a negative of the fingerprint on the surface, the non-porous material, and that's what we end up seeing.
The VMD process yielded 16 partial prints on the bags from the Mulcahy murder and 3 from the Marrero case. These prints were of much better quality than the original ones.
I was ecstatic. We have latents, balls in our court.
The new prints were entered into the National Fingerprint Database of known criminal offenders. Again, there were no matches. But Detective Kuhn also sent hard copies of the prints to each state, since not all states had put their prints into the nationwide database.
This was our last shot, and we felt that if we could reach out, that maybe they'd put that little extra effort into the submission.
When the fingerprints of the Last Call Killer made it through the mail to latent print examiner Kim Stevens in Maine State Police Crime Lab, she was happy to help out. The state of Maine hadn't yet put all of their prints onto the National Fingerprint Database.
I received the prints in the mail with a cover letter, and I read the letter and the synopsis of the case.
Kim Stevens entered the Last Call Killer's prints into Maine's state database.
I thought there's no way I would get a match. I had done a lot of searches for outside agencies, and the chances I thought would be very slim.
Okay.
But the database of known criminal offenders in Maine turned up 30 possible matches.
So 30 prints came up in the list for me to look at one by one, side by side, to see if they could be the print.
For the side-by-side comparison, Stevens used the original hard copies made by the 30 criminals when they were arrested and inked by police. It's time-consuming and exhausting.
Do you want to do it when your eye is fresh and you're ready to make comparisons?
Then, Stevens found one that she thought matched.
Every time I went to the next ridge and found detail that agreed, obviously it was a surprise. I was jumping up and down for joy and couldn't believe it.
The final step is to have the match verified by another examiner. And that person agreed. The prints belonged to Richard Rogers, a former graduate student in languages at the University of Maine. In 1973, Rogers was charged with using a hammer to kill his college roommate. He wrapped the body in a plastic tent and left it on the side of the road.
Richard Rogers apparently said that the other man had approached him for sex and the other man attacked him, so in self-defense he attacked back and ended up killing him.
Mr. Rogers claimed self-defense and was acquitted. Amazing.
After he was acquitted, Rogers got a nursing degree and eventually moved to New York. At the time of the Last Call murders, Rogers had been working as a surgical assistant at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. That's where police arrested him.
They put handcuffs on while he was in our intensive care unit. That does shock us, to say the least.
He was gay, didn't really seem to have any long-term relationships. In your wildest dreams, you would not look at Richard Rogers and say this guy is a serial killer.
We learned that during the times of these murders, Richard Rogers had been off-duty.
Lisa Hall chose Rogers' picture from a photo lineup as the man she saw with Mike Sakara at the bar on the night Sakara was murdered.
It was just a horrible, horrible thing, and I'm just so glad they got him before he could murder any other people.
Rogers lived in Staten Island, just blocks from the stores where the garbage bags and latex gloves were purchased.
Detectives searched Richard Rogers' apartment and they found an array of videotapes: Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. He had a Bible in which there were earmarked passages referring to beheadings and dismemberments.
Also in Rogers' apartment, they found a vial of a prescription drug used as a sedative. It's one that's not screened for in a routine autopsy.
You can use it as a date rape drug, or you can use it to knock people out.
Prosecutors believe Rogers would pick up his victims in gay bars. He targeted men who were drinking heavily.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it. Enjoy. I shall do it.
Rogers may have used a date rape drug and taken his victims back to his apartment, or they may have gone willingly.
Nice collection, too.
Once there, the evidence shows he stabbed them, then dismembered the bodies. He most likely moved the bodies to New Jersey at night to avoid detection. But even the most careful criminals make mistakes, and Rogers left evidence behind. The elaborate washing of the victims and the bags didn't remove everything. As for motive, Rogers wouldn't talk. All experts can say is that the murders had a clear sexual motivation.
It's the most bizarre case I've ever been involved with, And for all of these men, there was just no dignity in death.
In November of 2000, Rogers was tried and convicted of 2 of the murders, the cases where they had the most forensic evidence. He was sentenced to 2 life terms, plus 65 years in prison.
I think when you look back on it, is we never gave up. You keep plugging along.
It never ceases to amaze me what we get in terms of forensics, whether it's fingerprints, DNA, any number of things. It's the most powerful tool you can have in a courtroom as a prosecutor.
It was pretty horrible to sit there and look at this man that actually murdered Michael Sequeira, and to think about all the other people that lost their lives and all their families and friends that lost people because of this monster who was sitting there, but at least he was finally put away.
Yeah, this is looking pretty okay.
A 12-year-old girl claimed she had been kidnapped, but police weren't so sure. Her memory was too clear, her manner too unemotional, her heroism too unbelievable. Until some fibers on her clothing forced police to reconsider.
Oh, shit. Oh, fuck. Oh, Jesus, it's 4 in the morning.
It happened on a Wednesday afternoon in Freeport, Texas. 12-year-old Dana Stinson walked to her Bible study at church just a few blocks from home. 2 hours later, when the class was over, Dana didn't return home.
Her mother went looking for her and was advised by the teacher that she had never appeared in class. And then police got involved.
I knew it right away. My stomach went into knots. My legs were shaking. I was just certain something had happened.
Their neighbors joined in the search, but found no sign of the young girl. Dana's father was a local prison guard, and he feared that an ex-convict had taken revenge by targeting his daughter.
That something might have happened, one of the offenders might have abducted her, or the first thing that came across my mind. Might have been wrong or right about it at the time, I don't know.
Several hours passed.
There we go. That looks nice.
Then shortly
Oh, hi. Keep going.
after 10 p.m., a few miles away in Oyster Creek, Texas, Dana walked up to some boys playing basketball and claimed she had been kidnapped.
This was a deserted road. It was dark, not a lot of traffic. If you were there at night, you would think you were in the middle of nowhere.
Dana was taken to police headquarters and reunited with her family.
She was real calm. There was a real calmness about her, and to me, that is very strange.
She had a very flat affect, and it was extremely odd to me, her demeanor.
Dana told police that she was in the church parking lot and couldn't locate her classroom. Then, a white middle-aged man gave her directions. He walked her towards the door, then grabbed her and forced her into his van, tied her up, and put her in a wooden box lined with carpet. Dana said he drove the van somewhere near the ocean. She could hear the waves. Then he sexually assaulted her. An hour or two later, he assaulted her again in a motel room. She said the man had a knife.
And she told him, "Don't kill me. Don't do this to me. Don't kill me." And he said, "I'll let you go, and you better not tell nobody, because I know everything about you, and I'll kill you." And he pushed her out of the van.
I was extremely skeptical because horrible things that he did to her. There was no emotion when she told us about these things. So initially, I had a difficult time believing that.
Police were skeptical. She said she was kidnapped in a church parking lot in broad daylight, yet no one saw it. And the kidnapper released her in an area not far from the home of one of her friends.
She was released in an area that a young man lived that she knew personally, and some people described it, their relationship as maybe girlfriend and boyfriend.
Investigators told Dana they thought she was lying.
That was the first sign of emotion that we saw from her. And she said, "You can do what you have to do, I'm not lying." And I mean, she was as closer to tears then when she was accused of that or told that than she was during the entire interview.
I couldn't believe why they were like questioning her and interrogating her and stuff and saying that she might have made this up or this might have been a prank.
Police confiscated Dana's clothes for analysis, then asked her to return the next day for another interview. And it gave investigators a new insight into the case. The day after Dana Stinson's alleged kidnapping, she returned to police headquarters for a second interview. They wanted to make sure her story didn't vary. This time, investigators saw something that wasn't clearly visible the night before.
I can see what looked to be burn marks or red marks around both of her wrists, red marks at the outset of her eyes, red marks around her mouth where it appears that there's been some type of tape or something placed around her.
Dana said these were caused by the tape the kidnapper used over her mouth and around her wrists. Gradually, police began to believe her.
And she told Detective Dietrich in no uncertain terms, "I am not lying. Exactly what I told you has happened."
Her parents took Dana to the hospital for a physical examination, but by this time, potential forensic evidence was gone.
She should have gone to the hospital sooner. She didn't. Had she gone sooner, I'm not sure they ultimately would have recovered any DNA, but we always try to, as part of procedure, get the victim to the hospital as soon as possible to be checked out.
Fortunately, police had Dana's clothes. A pair of jeans, a pullover, and some socks were given to trace evidence analyst Devin Krakow-Stasha. Using tape lifts, she found numerous fibers.
It wasn't like I just found one or two of these carpet fibers. I had multiple of these fibers from different articles of her clothing. That, to a fiber analyst, is amazing. That's wonderful. You could not ask for much better than that.
Magnified 400 times, Devin noticed that there were two different types of blue fibers, presumably from two different sources.
One was a light blue, and it was a very sharp, angular, triangular shape. And then there was a lighter, kind of a bluish gray fiber that was also triangular, but it was more round. The nodes weren't as sharp.
Triangular or trilobal fibers are usually from carpet. There were other fibers on Dana's socks. These were round and small, the type normally seen in ropes. This was consistent with Dana saying her ankles were tied with rope. The investigation was taking a 180-degree turn. Now the forensic evidence was corroborating much of what Dana was saying.
I was extremely impressed, even to the most minute detail. She remembered, and through the things that she went through, most adults wouldn't be able to remember the things that she remembered.
Dana said her assailant was white with blonde hair, blue eyes, in his mid-40s, and had a medium build. He was driving a white van with tinted windows and the word "wood" painted on the glass. She said she was forced into a coffin-like box covered with blue carpet. And she remembered something else.
My victim described inside the van a orange ice chest, cooler type object. She said that it said Igloo on it, and it had some other writing on it. She couldn't remember exactly what it was. Lowe's, Home Depot, something of that nature. And inside that cooler were Dr. Peppers.
Investigators decided to go public with Dana's description of the van.
It hit the papers, and that there had been a kidnapping at the Catholic Church, and that there was possibly a white van. It's a suspect vehicle.
They were hoping that someone in the area might have seen the van or witnessed the abduction. 2 days after Dana Stinson's kidnapping, one of her neighbors contacted police saying he might have witnessed at least part of the abduction.
He said, I saw a white van in the area. It said Surfside Floor and Tile on the side of it. I saw it in and around circling the church all afternoon. I saw it park at the church. I saw it leave the church around 5:30, 5:45, and it never returned.
This was consistent with information Dana told investigators.
The child in the case was able to describe a word. She remembered wood that was on the side of the van.
Investigators checked the phone book and found a business called Surfside Installation, ceramic, vinyl, tile, and wood. The owner of the business was 36-year-old Randy Lee Allen, married for 17 years and the father of a 7-year-old boy. He had no criminal record.
He was told that he may have been a witness to a crime, and would he voluntarily follow us to the police department? His response was, sure, and voluntarily drove towards the police department.
Randy Lee Allen said he knew nothing about any kidnapping. He told police he was in a restaurant having dinner with his wife and child around the time of Dana's abduction. His wife corroborated his alibi. The case appeared to have hit a dead end. But police wanted one more thing from Randy Allen. They wanted to look inside his van, and he readily agreed. There was no coffin-like box in the back of his van like the one Dana described. But one thing particularly caught the attention of detectives.
There was an orange ice chest, Igloo, with the word Home Depot on it, that the lid's off of, and inside that ice cooler are Dr. Peppers.
Dana described seeing the same kind of ice chest in the abductor's truck, as well as the same color carpeting in the van's interior. Investigators also found some blue and white rope. Blue fibers from the carpet in the van, seen on the right, with the same shape and size of fibers found on Dana's clothing. Both samples were put under infrared light, causing the molecules to vibrate in unique ways. These can be charted to determine a sample's chemical makeup.
So if it's a nylon, it's going to show up as a nylon. If it's an acrylic, it'll be a totally different pattern. If it's a rayon, it's going to be a totally different pattern.
Samples from the van and from Dana's clothing were both made of a compound called Nylon 6,6. To take the comparison one step further, analysts turned to a microspectrophotometer.
That is basically a microscope that measures color. We pass light through a sample and it measures the absorbance, how much light of that is absorbed by our sample, and that actually tells us basically what color. It gives us a spectra of the color representation.
The colors in both samples were identical. The same set of tests were conducted on rope in Allen's truck and the rope fibers on Dana's clothing. Again, they were virtually identical.
When we get the phone call from the lab that those fibers match, we know we have Randy Allen. We are expecting at that point he's going to plead.
In Randy's home, police found pieces of lumber similar to pieces that would make a wooden box. Police asked Randy if he would put the pieces back together.
Oh, right.
Surprisingly, Randy agreed. While doing so, he made an incriminating statement.
When we asked him to reconstruct the box inside the van, he got inside the van and he started putting the box together, and he said, almost to himself, well, she was a little one. She was a little one. So yeah, this is how I did it.
Investigators noticed there was blue carpet lining the inside of the box. Fibers from this carpet matched the last remaining piece of forensic evidence found on Dana Stinson's clothing. Finally, police prepared a photo lineup and showed it to Dana Stinson, telling her that their suspect may or may not be in the lineup.
Less than 5 seconds, less than 3. Immediately. As soon as I gave it to her, she scanned it and she pointed to his picture and said, he's the man that took me from the church and did that to me.
Randy Lee Allen was confronted with Dana's identification and the forensic evidence. He confessed and read his statement on videotape.
I saw a little girl grabbed her and started walking her towards my van.
But one thing bothered investigators. If Randy Allen was the perpetrator, how could he have been at dinner with his wife and child while the abduction took place? The answer is unbelievable.
His wife was covering for him?
When Randy Lee Allen confessed to the abduction and sexual assault of a 12-year-old girl, his friends, business associates, and particularly his wife could hardly believe it.
She had been married to him for quite some time. They had a child together. She, of course, didn't want to believe that he was capable of this behavior. No one in his family wanted to believe that he was capable of this.
And with good reason.
There's no reason for me to be doing this.
The evidence showed a particularly calculated crime. Prosecutors believe Allen was cruising the neighborhood near Dana's church looking for a victim. He saw Dana Stinson, who appeared to be lost, so he offered to show her where her classroom was.
Yeah, that's actually right over here. I can take you if you want to head that way anyway.
As they passed his van, Allen forced her inside, gagged her with tape, wrapped it around her hands, and tied her feet with rope. Then he forced her into the coffin-like box with the lid on top, making it soundproof. He drove out near the ocean, parked his van, and sexually assaulted her. Then Allen put her back in the coffin and incredibly drove home.
He got out of the van, walked upstairs, had got his wife and his child, walked downstairs, got in his wife's car, and they went to dinner and were gone at least over an hour. He came back. His wife and child went upstairs. He told his wife he had more work to do. He went and got in the van with the child still in the box and drove off.
He took Dana to a local motel, but this time Dana fought back. She refused to do what he asked and demanded that he let her go. This, experts say, altered the balance of power in Dana's favor.
She became demanding. I'm not doing that anymore. I want you to let me go. I want you to let me go now. And I think in the end that shook the suspect a little bit.
I wish more of us could handle things that way, but most people aren't going to have that kind of strength, and most people aren't going to show that type of resilience early on and are going to need more help kind of coping with that long term.
Randy Allen acquiesced, drove her to a deserted location, and let her go. Prosecutors believe he had intended to kill her.
I don't think that Randy Allen ever thought he would be caught in this case and never considered forensic evidence being something that could link him back to this. I think that because I think he intended to kill his victim.
Almost all sex criminals exhibit some type of deviant sexual behavior in their teens or early 20s.
That looks not
Randy
too bad.
Lee Allen appeared to be one of the few exceptions.
I just found it incredibly strange. All of a sudden one day he woke up and decided to commit such a horrific crime. So when somebody decides to learn to dive into water, they don't usually jump off of a cliff first. They'll jump in off of a pool. And to me, this was jumping off of a cliff. There had to be more in his background. We just were unable to uncover anything.
Randy Lee Allen lived in the Dallas-Fort Worth area of Texas at the time when a number of young girls were abducted.
I feel like there's probably other victims. And that's our department's opinion. The investigators that worked on this case, the investigators that have read this case outside of our department, the prosecutor's office, all believe there are probably other victims out there.
But none has been found, and Randy Lee Allen made no more confessions. In September of 2003, he was convicted of kidnapping and sexual assault and received 2 consecutive terms of 75 years.
I detected no remorse. The only remorse I detected from him was the fact that he got caught and was looking at a lengthy prison term.
I really think hell's too good for people like that. I mean, let them suffer,
Dana Stinson is a pseudonym for the remarkable young girl who showed courage, determination, and whose near photographic memory helped solve the case. And the forensic evidence helped too.
They stick to her clothing and all that, her body. That's amazing. I can't believe how they can pick up something that small and make something stick like this, which I'm glad it did.
Okay,
Through science and all that.
It's amazing how, the world of forensics, it's how interesting it is and how from a tiny, tiny piece of nothing, they can find evidence. That is very amazing. I find it very, very amazing. And like I told you, I mean, if I was young and I had to do it all over again, yes, I think I would go for forensics.
Investigators described it as a 1 in a million chance. A tiny manufacturing flaw on an envelope exposed a murderer who was willing to kill innocent victims to get at the one person he wanted dead.
There we go. That looks better. Yeah.
It was a typical Monday morning at the Transamerica Title Insurance Company in Tempe, Arizona. There were only 4 employees, all friends, who spent their workdays processing paperwork. 46-year-old Julie Williams had been working at Transamerica for 2 months.
She had gotten this new job. Things were going really well for her. She was happy. When I talked to her on the phone, she always expressed how well things were going and how she was really starting to feel a sense of peace and joy in her life.
On a Monday morning around 9 a.m., Julie got a drink from the water cooler. After taking a sip, she said that her lips and tongue were burning and warned her co-workers not to drink the water.
She walks down to the bathroom. She goes into the bathroom, and the people are kind of worried about her.
The other employees were baffled.
They got some water out of the water cooler and tasted it, and it burned their mouths, and they had to spit it out.
Meanwhile, Julie never returned from the bathroom.
She's in the stall. They can't open the door because basically her body is against the door. Somebody has to crawl up over the stall or underneath the stall.
They found Julie unconscious, completely unresponsive. Paramedics arrived minutes later and rushed her to the hospital.
she was in a coma. And by that time, we knew that that was pretty serious and that the doctors were telling us we needed to get there quickly because they really weren't sure how bad this was.
At first, doctors thought Julie had suffered a massive stroke, but it was even worse.
MRI tests and the CAT scans and things like that were showing basically a flat line, which meant that she was brain dead, and we couldn't understand.
Doctors told Julie's 3 grown daughters she probably wouldn't survive.
Her heart was fine, her liver was fine, her kidneys were fine, and she could basically go on like this for who knows how long, but she was never going to wake up.
The hospital asked police to check on Transamerica's water supply.
When I went to the break room, there was an obvious odor that I could smell.
To toxicologists, this meant only one thing: cyanide.
People say, those who can smell it, and it is genetically controlled, that it smells like bitter almonds. About 40% of the population can't smell it.
As a precaution, everything inside the water cooler room was sent for testing.
On examining all the items that were in there, coffee cups, the coffee maker itself, the coffee creamer, just everything in there, there appeared to be a crystalline substance in all of these.
Investigators tested the substance with a chemical strip, and it turned blue.
So what you're producing is Prussian blue, which is one of the forms of cyanide.
A gas chromatograph test confirmed the findings. Scientists also found a massive amount of cyanide in the office coffee pot.
Well, 5 grams of pure cyanide, given as it is in total, is enough to kill probably about 25 people.
The water cooler alone had 32 grams of pure cyanide, enough to kill 150 people.
Good God.
But who wanted to kill the employees of Transamerica Title Company? And why? 48 hours after Julie Williams ingested a massive amount of cyanide, her 3 daughters made the difficult decision to take her off life support. There was nothing medical science could do.
That's a difficult decision. You're not ready to say goodbye as it is, and now suddenly you have to make the decision to end someone's life.
Investigators found the source of the cyanide Julie had ingested. It was in the office coffee pot and water cooler.
Would not have been difficult for all 4 people in that office to have been killed, because cyanide is really a strong poison. I mean, they could have died before anyone figured out what happened.
Police questioned the 3 remaining employees in the Transamerica office. One of them, Diane Harry, made a startling admission. She said that she may have been the intended target. Diane said that a few nights earlier, she was drinking some Scotch whiskey at home with her husband, and it made her ill.
She also told him that there was something wrong with the tea kettle. She tried to make coffee, and when she put the creamer in it, it curdled.
Investigators tested the bottle of Scotch from the Harrys' home and confirmed their suspicions. The bottle contained lethal amounts of cyanide.
Oh, really
Diane's
trying to get this
husband,
woman dead,
Louis
huh?
Harry said he thought he knew who was responsible. He said it was Roy Fitzpatrick, a 43-year-old delivery man.
Roy Fitzpatrick was an ex-boyfriend of a girl that Mr. Harry was now befriended. That's the way he described it.
Fitzpatrick's ex-girlfriend was 33-year-old Sharon Jones.
Well, I had dated Mr. Fitzpatrick briefly, and he would never accept no. He would stalk me, he would choke me, and he threatened to kill me if I started dating anyone else. Mr. Harry was very, very persistent that I go to get a restraining order against Mr. Fitzpatrick. He even went with me to the courthouse to get it done.
Sharon Jones and Louis Harry then realized that the restraining order backfired. It infuriated Fitzpatrick, who responded by sending threatening letters to Louis Harry and his wife Diane.
Mr. Harry, describing the content of the letter, said that basically Roy Fitzpatrick was threatening him and his wife, and that they were getting increasingly more sinister.
The letters were laced with racial epithets. This one was sent to Diane Harry.
I am having a hard time overlooking your husband. I think I will take you away from him so that he can see how it feels.
And he wrote this to Lewis.
You won't have to hurt for long, 'cause your ass is mine.
Investigators asked Roy Fitzpatrick if he sent the threatening letters. Initially, he denied it.
A day later, he recontacted me and came in and decided he wanted to tell me the truth and admitted that he had sent letters to Mr. Harry.
But Fitzpatrick claimed he was angry with Lewis Harry not because of the restraining order, but because he was sexually involved with his ex-girlfriend, Sharon Jones.
I met Lewis Harry in a club. I was in love with Mr. Harry. He had asked me to marry him. As soon as the divorce was through, he had said that we would get married.
Roy Fitzpatrick discovered this was all a lie.
Mr. Fitzpatrick followed Lewis Harry home one night from my condo, and he called me within minutes of Mr. Harry leaving, stating that he was still married, the wife was still in the home, and that he wasn't going through any divorce.
When police confronted Lewis Harry about the affair, he denied it. And Roy Fitzpatrick gave police one last piece of information. He admitted sending Lewis and Diane Harry 4 threatening letters, but claimed that the 3 typewritten letters, the most incriminating, were forgeries. Investigators noticed that one of the typewritten letters was in an envelope with a distinctive flaw. The spot where the flaps met was offset. They didn't match up the way they were supposed to. Apparently, this was a manufacturing flaw.
When you've been in the business for any length of time, you know that this is a very significant fund, and that, and especially in a murder case, this is going to be a very important piece of physical evidence.
On an envelope assembly line, blades slice through reams of paper, creating a form with 4 flaps. When the flaps are glued, the left and right ones are supposed to meet in the center of the envelope. In this case, the right flap overlapped the left.
These were coming down the assembly line. They were moving further and further out of whack the way they should be.
Investigators believed if they could find out who bought the flawed envelope, they would find the killer. Police were investigating the cyanide death of 46-year-old Julie Williams and the attempted poisoning of her co-worker, Diane Harry. The prime suspect in the case, Roy Fitzpatrick, admitted sending Diane Harry and her husband Lewis 4 threatening letters. But Fitzpatrick denied sending the 3 most incriminating ones.
I was skeptical. He said that he had done the first 4, but he'd given me something, but now he was just taking away the last 3 letters, and so it just caused more doubt and created some more issues that we were going to have to try to verify or confirm or not confirm.
But if Fitzpatrick didn't send these 3 typewritten letters, who did? On a hunch, investigators got a warrant to search Lewis Harry's office. He worked in the physical education department of a local community college.
It was interesting that they went to Mr. Harry's workplace and they took this big shelf that was in his office. It's like 5 or 6 feet long. That ended up going out to their expert out at ASU, Arizona State University.
Also in Lewis Harry's wastepaper basket, they found a receipt from Chemonix, a local chemical company.
The label had warning information with regard to the use of cyanide.
But the receipt was signed by someone who identified himself as Charles Holly. He told the clerk he needed the cyanide for a college chemistry class. Forensic document examiner Bill Flynn was asked to compare this signature to Lewis Harry's known signature.
The second letter in the name Holly is an ovate, round letter. It is also an ovate, round letter in Harry. And there's a very distinctive style that he used to move from the H into the next ovate letter.
Both last names ended with a Y, and Flynn discovered that they were virtually identical, as were the H's at the beginning of each name.
For instance, the right side of the H in Holly is made with that rightward curving, clockwise rotation, circular movement on the H, which we saw is the characteristic that's replicated in Harry's own name.
Investigators went to the Chemonics company and showed the sales clerk a photo lineup. The clerk identified Louis Harry as the man who purchased the cyanide.
And so she sold him the cyanide under the Phoenix College account, and he signed a different name to the receipt.
In Louis Harry's office, investigators found an open box of envelopes. When they looked at the ones left in the box, they found that 3 of them had the same defect as the one with the threatening letter.
In fact, it was a progressive and linear defect, meaning that you could see the progression, how the defect had enlarged as the envelopes had moved down the manufacturing line. Normally, the people in post-production, in the quality control, would have culled those out rather than put them into the box.
I was actually just amazed that something like that would occur. It was probably 1 in a million that this would have happened.
This proved that Louis Harry sent himself at least one of the threatening letters, perhaps more. And on the shelf in his office, scientists found trace amounts of cyanide. But how did Louis Harry gain access to his wife's office building to poison the water?
A keycard system is used to gain access on weekends. You have to use a card to scan in to get into the door.
The office security system revealed someone entered the Transamerica office on the weekend before the poisoning.
The card that had been used was Diane Harry's, and had been used at 10:18 on that Saturday.
But Diane insisted she hadn't gone into the office that weekend.
The information raised a question as, number one, who used the card? And it obviously made sense that if someone used the card that knew her, that person would also have access to the keys to the office.
No one reported seeing a woman enter the building that weekend, but a workman recalled seeing a man enter.
The subject who had been there as a workman, an outside contractor, that had been there waiting to get inside the building because it was locked. And he said it was sometime between 10 and 10:30 that an African-American subject pulled up in a blue sports car, got out, was not very congenial, opened the door for him.
He wasn't able to actually identify him or pick him out of the lineup, but he remembered that the car had a tennis racket in the back seat. Mr. Harry had a tennis racket. He played tennis all the time.
Louis Harry was arrested and charged with the murder of Julie Williams and the attempted murder of his wife, Diane. But why did he do it? About a year after Julie Williams' murder, 32-year-old Louis Harry went on trial for murder and the attempted murder of his wife, Diane. Prosecutors believe Louis was unhappy in his marriage to Diane, whom he had been married to for less than 3 years. Then one night in a bar, he met Sharon Jones, a student at the community college where he worked. Initially, he misled Sharon by telling her he was separated.
It became serious very quickly, within 3 to 4 weeks.
Louis proposed marriage to Sharon while still living with his wife, Diane. Sharon's ex-boyfriend, Roy Fitzpatrick, learned about a relationship with Louis Harry, grew angry, then mailed the threatening letters to Louis and his wife.
Ironically, they weren't fighting over me. I could see that then. I told them both. I said, you know what? This isn't because you want me. It's because of your egos.
These letters gave Louis what he believed to be the perfect alibi. He'd kill his wife with cyanide, pin the murder on Roy Fitzpatrick, then he'd be free to marry Sharon. He typed 3 more letters, even more incriminating than the originals, and mailed them to himself. But Lewis used an envelope with a significant manufacturing flaw that tied him to those letters. Lewis bought the cyanide in a local supply store using an alias, but forensic handwriting analysis concluded that Lewis signed the receipt. Lewis tried killing his wife by putting cyanide in her alcoholic beverage, but she stopped drinking it because of its foul odor. He also put cyanide in her tea kettle. This, too, was unsuccessful. So that's when Lewis decided to use his wife's security pass to put cyanide in the office water cooler and coffee pot. On Monday morning, Julie Williams was the first one to drink from the water cooler, and she ingested a massive dose of cyanide. She was an innocent victim of a marriage gone horribly wrong.
And really glad that he'll never be able to hurt anybody else again. And really grateful for a system that protects its members from people who cannot control their own actions or who make bad choices in their life.
At the trial, Lewis's wife and his girlfriend sat together. Neither one thought he was capable of murder.
Two girls would sit back there, the two ladies, look at me, give me dirty looks, and they were supporters of Louis Harry.
Prosecutors presented what they believed to be a possible financial motive as well.
Diane Harry had the life insurance policy for $75,000, and he was the beneficiary. If she died, he was the beneficiary. He would have gotten that money.
Louis Harry was tried and convicted of first-degree murder and 4 counts of attempted murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. After almost 2 decades, his girlfriend is finally convinced of his guilt.
Mr. Harry did a very horrendous thing. I tried to forgive him, and I can't. I still can't forgive him.
Diane Harry's brother went into her attic, found more cyanide. I think it was only at that time that she realized that he had been trying to kill her.
Louis Harry is now in the Arizona State Prison complex. During a recent telephone interview, he still maintains his innocence.
I'm very sorry for Julie Williams' family, for them to have gone through this. As far as the actual crime itself, I didn't commit the crime, so it's kind of hard to have remorse for something that I didn't do.
Investigators believe the evidence proves the exact opposite. The handwriting, the flawed envelopes, the eyewitness, and cyanide particles in his office all indicate that Louis Harry was prepared to do anything to end his marriage.
Except get a
even
divorce.
If it meant killing others to do it.
It would have been much more difficult to obtain a conviction without the evidence of the matching envelopes and without the handwriting comparison.
It was like, a work of art. It started, it grew, and then it came to a completion, and it was all there. There was nothing they could dispute. I don't care what defense they brought up, we defeated all of them.
Alrighty. I am gonna go fuck to sleep. Because it's late, and I'm tired. But I got through doing the ocean in the background in the house on the touch screen, so that's nice. Anywho, hope everybody has a good day. I'll see you later for streaming. For now, I'm gonna go get a fucking nap. Night all.